Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. And today I'm going to run through some of the features or some of the modifications that I made to the Jeep I drove around Africa that didn't quite work out how I wanted or that I would do differently next time. So when I drove Alaska to Argentina, the little Jeep I drove was totally stock. I just had a ground tent. I'd never even heard of overlanding before. I was on the road for 2 years and I learned a bunch along the way. I met a lot of people driving around and they had these really cool vehicles that you could sleep in, they had kitchen setups, all those kinds of things. So when I was dreaming of a vehicle to drive around Africa, I knew that I really wanted to improve my sleeping, I really wanted to improve my cooking and eating, and I wanted to improve where I can hang out to escape the weather. And I think I did that really well. Overall, this vehicle met my needs. I'm super happy with it. And if you told me right now to go and drive around Africa again in the same Jeep, I would say, absolutely, let's go. So I'm not disappointed or it isn't a failure, but there are some things that I will do differently next time. And I'll give you the reasons why. So hopefully you can learn from that and you can incorporate it into whatever vehicle you're building for your trip. So let's get into it. A few things about my Jeep that I'll improve for next time. Without a doubt, the worst thing about my Jeep is that it's too heavy. And so because I added all of the four-wheel drive goodies, like steel bumpers and a winch and suspension lift and a skid plate for the engine, and I added all the overland goodies, like a sleeping setup, a fridge, drinking water and filtration, all my clothes, all my food, so on and so forth, it basically just means it's a very heavy vehicle. So as it sits right now, it's basically right on its payload rating, which is 5,750 pounds. But when I was in Africa, when I was loaded with gear, with food, with water, and full of gas, there's no doubt about it, I was over payload a little bit. And that just has negative flow-on effects all over the place. More wear and tear on the vehicle, higher chances of failure. But most noticeably for me is it just handles badly when you're off-roading. So when the roads are rough, even just corrugated gravel roads, the whole system is heavier than it was ever designed to be, which makes it annoying to drive. It really wallows from side to side. It doesn't handle corrugation so well. So overall, the vehicle is just too heavy, which is something that we all struggle with as overlanders. And while we're on the point, I've seen a few people say, yeah, the Wrangler has a small payload. I'm just going to get a vehicle with a bigger payload than Dan, then I can bring whatever I want. Well, be careful because the goldfish always fills the bowl. And if you go into it with that mentality, you're just going to fill up whatever payload you do have, and you're going to run into the same problem that I have, butting up against your payload and having a heavy vehicle. So for me, a huge priority for my next vehicle, I have to somehow make it lighter. So although I tried hard on this one, I'm going to scrutinize even harder next time. Everything that I add, I'm going to carefully look at the weight, and everything that I bring with me, it has to serve multiple functions and be multi-use to try as hard as I can to just have less weight. Of course, someone else suggested I should just fill the inside with helium balloons. Maybe I'll try that as well. Another thing that I will do differently next time is I probably won't bring a high lift jack. So first of all, the jack is quite heavy and all of the weight is back here behind the rear axle, which is far from ideal. On top of that, I figure a high lift jack is probably the most dangerous thing I have with me. Whenever I was using this, I was super careful that it wouldn't flick out and hit me. I feel like, if this had have broken my hand or my ankle or something, that's a really big deal when you're remote in Africa. So from a safety perspective, I'm not the biggest fan of high lift jacks. And then the other thing that I really didn't like about it is when you're using it, it jacks up the frame of the vehicle, which is great, but because of the amount of suspension I have in the Jeep, basically the tires just droop and droop and droop, and I have to jack up the Jeep until the frame is 3 feet off the ground before the tires are even off the ground. So because the high lift is the only jack that I have, I was using it to do my tire rotations, and it just seemed really dangerous to have to jack up the Jeep that much. To try and compensate for that, I would use a ratchet strap, and I ratchet strap the axle to the frame before I even jack anything up. that worked, but rolling around in the dirt gets old when you have to do it every 6,000 miles. So a high lift jack for me, yeah, you can use it for sort of weird recovery scenarios, but you know, I already have a winch, I already have max tracks, I already have a shovel. How much recovery gear do I want to bring? Remember, you can't bring everything that you want. And to be honest, you know, am I ever going to use the high lift in a recovery scenario? I don't know. I mean, lots of people do. You find a reason, and maybe it's helpful if you bend your tie rod, you can use it to straighten that, and other ideas where it's useful as a tool. Yeah, I get that. But I think next time I'm just going to go with a really high quality bottle jack. It can be inside the vehicle down low to keep the weight centered, and then I just don't have the same safety issues. It's not out here in the weather. You can see how much this thing's been beaten up. So for me next time, I think I'm not going to have a high lift jack. The next thing on my list that I'll do differently is the awning that I have on the back of my Jeep. And there's way too much snow around right now, so I'll show you some photos of it set up. And this little thing, I added it because it's really nice to have coverage over my kitchen area, and especially in Africa, a lot of the times it was coverage from the sun. And I liked it because it's so small, therefore it's light. And don't get me wrong, it's a great little awning, this little 1250 from ARB. It's narrower than the Jeep is, so you know, it doesn't stick out, it doesn't get caught on tree branches or anything. But the thing is, it's just so narrow that when it's pouring rain, the rain only needs to be coming in a little bit sideways, and I only get the tiniest little strip of rain-free space under this awning. So its benefit is that it's small, but it actually turns out to be its biggest downside is that it's too small. So for me, I think I didn't really use this awning very much because it didn't actually add that much benefit. So strangely enough, if I'm going to have one next time, I'll actually have a bigger one. I'm either thinking about one mounted on the side of the vehicle or maybe even one of the wraparound 270-degree awnings. And I like the idea of having all that outdoor living space, but there's no doubt about it, those things are heavy. So then I'm butting up against my major problem, too much weight. So I really am on the fence what I'll do next time, but I definitely won't have an awning this small. It's just too small to be useful. Something else I really learned the hard way is to spend more time choosing the suspension that I'm going to run on my vehicle. So because we add so much weight to our vehicles and we're going to drive long distances off-road, upgrading suspension does become a necessity if our vehicles get that heavy. And when I was designing this thing, I really didn't want it to be a monster truck. I have no interest in big tires. I didn't want to have a huge suspension lift. And so I spec'd out a 2.5-inch lift from AEV. And they warned me at the time, that lift isn't designed to handle a lot of weight, but I was in denial. I thought my Jeep was going to wind up lighter than it was. And that was my mistake. I bought the suspension before I even knew how much the Jeep weighed. So go back to my lessons video, build your vehicle first, use it a few times, figure out how heavy it is, then you can get a suspension that matches the weight of your vehicle. And that's the big lesson I learned. Don't go for like an off-roading suspension that just tells you how many inches of lift you're getting, because as overlanders, we don't really care that much about how high our vehicle winds up. Well, actually, we don't want it high, we want to keep it lower. Better for gas mileage, better for fitting in shipping containers, all of that stuff. What we really care about is a suspension that's designed to carry the weight of our vehicle. So that's what you need to look for, and figure out how heavy your vehicle is, then get a suspension setup designed for that. And so what I learned is the 2.5-inch lift, it just couldn't handle the weight of this Jeep. And by the time I got halfway around Africa, it was not pleasant to drive. And I actually upgraded to AEV's 3.5-inch lift. That's what's on the Jeep right now, and it's been fantastic. It is purpose designed to carry a lot more weight. And AEV even have yet another one called their high capacity suspension, designed for heavy Jeeps like mine. And I'm really on the fence about upgrading to it because it only comes in a 4.5-inch height. So there's no doubt it will make my Jeep sit higher, which I don't really want, but it probably will make it handle better just because it has stiffer springs that are designed for the weight. But next time, I'm going to build my vehicle, put everything in it and on it that I need, drive it around for a few weeks, put it on a weigh scale. Once I know how much it weighs, I'll be able to spec out the correct suspension from the beginning. It'll save me a bunch of hassle and it'll save me money. As you can see, I'm focusing heavily on weight in these lessons that I've learned. That really is so fundamental. But I learned it in the other direction as well, and I went a bit too far. When I first spec'd out this Jeep, I mounted flexible solar panels on the roof. And that was me trying to walk that fine line of reducing weight, but still having products that are durable enough to go the distance. And it turned out those flexible panels weren't durable enough. And Renogy, the maker of the solar panel, they did have a bad batch, and so they took them off the market, they sent me replacement panels, they did a really great job, but now I'm running solid panels, which are clearly heavier, they're higher, and they hurt my wind resistance, they made it more tricky to get it in a shipping container. So I kind of am really on the fence next time about whether I would run flexible panels, if they'll be durable enough, or if I should just stick with solid panels because I know they're so strong, virtually indestructible. So these are the kind of fine lines that we have to try and walk. And I know Renogy have completely redesigned from the ground up their flexible panels. They are much stronger and more durable now. So I am leaning towards that for the next build. Depending on what kind of roof I have, maybe if I have a roof rack, flexible panels just won't really work that well. But this is again what I'm trying to show you guys. You have to think about how light a product is, but also to make sure it's still durable enough and up to the task that you're putting it up to. So I hope that list has been helpful, and I hope it gets you thinking about the kinds of considerations that go into designing and building an overland vehicle. So as you can see, it's kind of a fine balance. We want to have as much capability and reliability as we can, but the enemy is weight, and we have to be really careful that we don't just make our vehicle too heavy. So all of these ideas are buzzing around in my head as I'm starting to design and plan my next vehicle. And to be honest with you, I don't exactly know what it's going to be yet. Coronavirus has really put a wrench in the works for my next adventure. I have a bunch of different irons in the fire that I'm working on, and I don't want to say that I'm headed off on a trip and then have to back out of that because, it's out of my control. So what I'm doing is, once the trip is really locked in and I know for certain that I can make it happen, I'm going to announce it to you guys, and then I'll start talking about my vehicle, and I'm going to bring you along for the whole process of designing it, building it, using it, and then I'll obviously document the entire trip. And I want to show you guys what my expeditions look like from the very beginning all the way through. So that's all coming up in the future, but before then, obviously, we've got winter coming up here, and I'll keep bringing you these videos to teach you everything that I've learned from my years on the road. So if this is helpful, please do hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. There are always new videos coming out every Monday and Thursday to teach you and help you get out there and have your own grand adventures. So until then, stay warm. I better put some gloves on, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road someday.